It's going to be worth it. I guarantee. Oh, it's already on.
It's on now.
Diane came to Unity of Gulfport several years ago when her husband Bob got a job here. Was it Hancock Bank, Bob? Mm-hmm. And we were still in the other building then. It was before we had built this one. And like Christy, Diane has lost a daughter. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. We know how painful that is, and I had to ask Diane if she was ready to talk about it, of course, and she said that she was, so we don't want to cause pain to anybody. But Diane, could you start off first and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your early life?
Oh, okay, chronologically
Uh-huh.
speaking.
Yeah.
I was born in Denver, Colorado. I lived there, went and finished my sophomore year at South High School in Denver. And my dad, in the meantime, was a mechanical engineer, and my mom was working as a teller. My dad got a job with the Colorado State Boys Reformatory teaching mechanical engineering. So we moved to the small town of Buena Vista, Colorado. And my mom, there weren't very many banks, one or two at the time, and she was able to get a job as a teller there as well. My dad also part-time taught mechanical engineering at Buena Vista High School, so he was a teacher in my high school. And I graduated from Buena Vista High School in 1970, and then I married my high school sweetheart. And he was in the service, so he was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base in Arizona, and we moved there. We had 2 children. They were both born at the Air Force Base. I think that's now closed. I don't even think it's there anymore. But we lived there for a while, and eventually, his name was Tom. Tom and I divorced, and I ended up going back to Denver with my 2 children and with my grandmother helping me. And we lived in Denver until I met my second husband. And so when I met Bob and married him, our kids were sure that the third time was a charm, because he was also married twice before.
Well, just to keep it even and balanced.
Yeah, even and balanced. And so far it's worked out that the third time's been a charm. So, and at one point I ended up with my mother in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Actually, I kind of going backwards a little bit. When my husband, Tom, father of my children, went to Korea, so he was stationed in Korea for a while. So I went to live with my mother, and I haven't really had a specific career. I did work my working life, but I had lots and lots of jobs. I learned to be a dental technician there, and I was a dental technician for about 10 years. And then I worked in sales and accounting and did a lot of, actually I was a full-time temporary for an organization and worked that for about 5 years. So my dental technician and my full-time temporary job, which I was sent all over the place, were the 2 longest stints I had. So I did some sales. I worked here at Sears when Sears was still in Edgewood Water Mall, and I was getting people to, for free, at the time for free, to agree to have someone take a look at how much it would cost to have their kitchens remodeled. So I would just go around giving people this little free pamphlet, say,
Cool.
fill this paper out and someone will come and give you an estimate.
Cool.
So I did that for a while, and then my daughter got sick, so I ended up retiring, and in the middle of all of that, and helping to take care of her.
Tell us a bit about your spiritual path, how things began to shift for you.
Well, interestingly enough, it started when I was married to my second husband, Gary, and we'd had a failed business. We had a wild bird center store, and I don't know if there was anything like that around here. There was Wild Bird Centers and Wild Birds Unlimited were the two big wild bird center stores. And it's just kind of a gift store, but it had bird seed and bird things and other stuff. That business failed for us, and it was devastating. And I knew I had to get over it. I had to move on, and I didn't know exactly how to do that. And I had a friend who said, well, let's start with you just being in the silence. And he was, actually he was Jewish, and he was just a really good friend and a nice guide for the time. He said, I want you to sit both in the silence, and then also I want you to put classical music, play a CD with classical music. And it helps to calm or rearrange the neurons in your brain. So I did that, and one time I put the Pachelbel's canon in D minor in, and I had this amazing experience. It's like my head exploded, and everything was different for me. I went from everything was about me to everything was about the world, and I had something to offer the world had something to offer to me. I had not been a failure, and I needed to grasp that and move on. And in the meantime, I didn't even know how to explain it. It's like and it was March, and it was snowing, and all the little snowflakes I could see, like every little snowflake, and everything just became really, really clear. And I didn't know what that was. And my ex-husband came in, and he saw me sitting on the floor, like crying, and he's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm more than flesh and blood. There's something else in here. And he thought I was crazy. In the meantime, I found out that's something called a spontaneous mystical experience. So instead of just kind of growing into that space, I was popped into it. And from there, I started seeking ways to support all of that. So I did some landmark education training. I moved out of my husband's home because he was so upset about the whole thing, and lived with a woman who went to Unity. And she said, why don't you come to Unity with me? You might like it. And I went to Unity, and and it was Unity of Madison, Wisconsin. And they were going through a transition, so they had a transition pastor there. But she was wonderful. And she talked about things that I just could never have believed, would be talked about in a church. Because I had grown up Lutheran, my children had grown up Methodist. It was all about Jesus and rules and and I was just kind of blown away with Unity. So I just kept coming back to Unity. It made a big difference for me and my spiritual growth. I started doing all kinds of classes with Unity and participating. And then when I met Bob, I took Bob to Unity. We got married in the Unity Church at Wimberley in Austin, not in Austin, but in Wimberley, which is like a little suburb of Austin. So that's how I got to Unity.
That's a wonderful story. I wanted you to share that. Now we get to the place where you and Bob are in Gulfport, and you already found out that your daughter is sick. Or how did that come about, Diane?
How did that come about?
She was a chiropractor, a professional, and had a great career.
She did. She had, it was like her 10th year of being a chiropractor. She had started her own chiropractic practice in Chandler, Arizona. And she started having pain in her lower abdomen and went to a doctor who took x-rays or did some kind of imaging and saw spots on her liver, and that doctor said, I think these are, like lesions, and we need to just do a resection of your liver. So that's like take that part out, and the liver is very regenerative. So, and I was with her at the time when the doctor talked about it, and I said, how do you know it's not cancer? Oh, I know it's not cancer. I'm like, could you just make sure, like, can you do like a needle biopsy? Can you just do something? No, he knew what it was, so they scheduled the surgery. They got my daughter into surgery, slid her from here to here, got in there. That's when they decided to do a biopsy and found out it was cancer. So he didn't take anything out. He sewed her back up. And he came out and told me, your daughter has cancer, and we don't know what kind of cancer it is. And I was alone. I did not have any, like, friends in Chandler, Arizona. It was really, really hard. I called my Aunt Kathy and talked with her, and she was just the sweetest. She's like, oh, she's just a baby. I'm like, I know. She was 36 at the time. And fortunately, I was one of her, I don't know if I had a phone number or how I got a hold of these people, but one of her friends did kind of take me in. And then eventually when she was in the recovery room, the doctor was supposed to tell her how bad her cancer was. It was 4-stage cancer. And he didn't have a clue what kind of cancer it was. He didn't tell her it was 4-stage cancer. He told her she had cancer, period. And it didn't seem to bother her a bit. She thought it was like the 1st-stage cancer. So she decided, instead of, like figuring out maybe what kind of cancer it was, and somehow she ended up finding out it was colon cancer. I think they did a colonoscopy. And she just decided to do chemo instead of, and it had spread to her liver, hadn't gone anywhere else. And instead of doing surgery and going through all of that, she decided to go straight for chemo, which was not what I would have recommended. But she was a big girl and she could make her own decisions. And that was what was really, really hard for me, because I wanted to take over. I knew how, of course, being her mom, I knew how to take care of her. I knew what she should do to keep herself alive and going, and she didn't do it. She eventually did find out. She was in bed, like at midnight one night, reading something on the internet where she figured out she had 4-stage cancer. And it really freaked her out. She called me crying and upset, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, because I thought the doctor was supposed to tell her just exactly what was going on, and he never did. at any rate, she just, I think at that point, she just kind of gave up. She did continue with chemo treatments, and then eventually it did spread to her brain. She had a brain tumor. She did have that removed. She lived with it for 18 months. And the last couple of months, she stopped the chemo. She stopped everything. She's like, this is it, you know. The chemo was miserable. And so the last couple months, the cancer didn't hurt. The last couple months, she lived, you know, a fairly free and happy life.
I remember, because we were friends at the time and pretty close, and I remember you're telling me how you felt about being sort of excluded because she was making the decisions on her own. And I really related to you, empathized with you, because as a mother, I would have wanted to be included in those decisions too. And I really felt it for you, but I remember how difficult that was. And when you would, it was difficult if you were here, it was difficult if you traveled back there, because it, like you said, I remember you didn't really have a place there, so you'd need to stay with somebody. And when you look back on that time now, Diane, how do you look upon it?
I'm grateful that somehow I was able to stay with some of her friends right after I found out. We didn't get along. She had a friend who was a hospice nurse who said, that's actually, you know, her being negative towards me was not an unusual response for a child to a mother. And interestingly enough, I'm like, okay, well, at least it's not unusual, but when's it gonna stop? And it really went on with her. She was really upset and angry. She thought it was my genes. It was my fault she had cancer. She let me know. She didn't want me to have anyone.
Thank you.
She didn't
Thank
want
you, Dad.
She didn't want to take my advice. She didn't really want me to be around. And I think she felt pressure. And I guess I understand that now, is that she must have felt pressured to get better because I wanted her to.
Right.
And anyway, I was eventually called back. So I went home, and then we were living in Biloxi at the time, and a friend of hers called me and said, really, it's time for you to come. And I went, and she had friends coming to stay with her at the time because she was kind of getting more weak and more sick. This was like a couple weeks before she passed. And eventually she ended up falling, and her friend got her into bed, and she never got out. So her friend called me and said, it's time for you to come. And when I got there, and you know, friends and family were surrounding her, she couldn't really talk anymore, but I felt like she had forgiven me, or we had come together somehow. And then after she passed, it was a very interesting, for me anyway, experience. I guess it's a spiritual experience. We had a memorial service in Arizona where she lived, and then we were having another memorial service where she grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. And on the day that we were to take the flight out to Madison, Wisconsin, I woke up in the morning and I had a dream about Brianne, and it was like the most vivid dream ever. I was dreaming that I was kind of walking around a group of buildings, and all of a sudden around the corner came Brianne, and I could see her hair, I could see what dress she was wearing. She had a handful of notebooks or papers or something, and I ran into her and I said, "Oh my God, Brianne, I thought you had passed away." And she said, "Well, it's a long story."
It's a long story.
Which was really kind of like her. And then I said, "Well, let's go talk about this." And I grabbed her by the arms, and I could feel her arms, and we just kind of moved over. And I said, "Brianne, we are having a memorial service for you in Madison this, like a couple days from now." And she's, "I know." And then I woke up.
Okay. Do you have more of a sense of it was meant to be in now when you're looking back on it? Do you have a sense of maybe this was the time before she came and was born that she knew she'd be passing away, or how do you feel about that, Diane?
Oh no, I don't think she knew she'd be passing away at all. She was pissed about it until the end. She had a lot of life to live. She had started her own business. She had taken up acupuncture and other things. She had a boyfriend, and she wanted life. And no, I don't think she ever had that thought or experience.
March of which year?
March of 2013, March 3rd, 2013.
2013.
And
I know that was extremely difficult for you and all the years since, but I know that you have a lot of joy now with your son has a son, is that right?
He does. My grandson is 9 years old now. He is autistic, he is savant, and he's fun and funny. When he was little, you could tell there was something going on, and I'm thinking to myself, I think this is autistic. And he was at the point where he wasn't, meeting developmental marks. And I remember my son saying, "I wish he just knew his name. I wish he just knew his name." And when he was, so they did take him to a doctor, and the doctor said, well, yeah, basically somehow they figure out that they're autistic. And at 3 years old, he started school, like a special school for autistic kids. And so which really made a big difference. He's social, he's smart, and fun and funny. He can still melt down. In fact, he was at our house one day, and he wanted my dog Zoe to play with him, and he loved watching her play. She doesn't play very often with toys or anything, but he wanted her to play before he left. I'm like, I can't get her to play. And he stood in the hallway and he's crying, "But what if she doesn't play before I leave?" And he's like, and I'm like, "Owen, are you having a meltdown?" And he kind of stopped for a minute and looked at me like, "What?" And then he continued to melt down. So, interestingly enough, the dog did pick up the toy and play before he left. So I don't know if that was his way of manifesting something.
Yeah. And you also, this little guy.
Oh, it's Scooter. This is Scott. So after my daughter passed, after my mom passed, Bob decided he wanted a dog. And I said, and he wanted it to be a rescue dog. And I said, okay, that's fine with me as long as it's a little dog that doesn't shed. And I'm thinking, I really don't want to have to take care of a dog. And we'll never find a rescue like that because those are expensive dogs. You have to buy them. It wasn't more than about 2 months later, a friend of ours who's a foster parent for dogs called and said, "I have this little dog, I think it's a Shih Tzu Poodle mix. It's a little dog that doesn't shed." And so we said, well, okay, bring him over. Let's take a look at him. Well, not quite. I think I said, like, can you bring him over tomorrow? She's like, no, you have to see him today. I have to find a home for him today. So she came. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and brought this little guy over, and we fell in love with him, and he's a funny little boy. And yes, we did keep him, and he's now a therapy dog. And then we adopted his little sister, his little big sister, because she's older, Zoe, and she's a Bichon Frise. And they're both therapy dogs. So although I didn't really have a career or a career path during my working years, I guess you could call therapy dog handler an avocation. So we visit hospitals and nursing homes and behavioral health and libraries and schools, and sometimes churches. And it just brings me joy to know that my dogs are bringing joy to all these people who some people don't like dogs. You have to ask them, do you like dogs? No, you have to stay away. But people who love dogs are so grateful to see dogs, coming in. And they do kind of have a healing effect. It's like all of a sudden you forget what your problems are.
You're being comforted by these.
Being comforted by them, yeah. So,
Wow.
And we have fun with the dogs at behavioral health with the children and the adolescents. We do tricks, and then the kids build tunnels and bridges and with their bodies, and the dogs jump over and go through them, and they, and then they do dancing twirls, and they jump over the kids. It's fun. So anyway,
they have brought a lot of joy to your life.
That's right. So
a lot of peace and joy. And is there any little piece of advice that you would give people that are going through tremendous loss? Anything that you could say it'll get better?
I would say you definitely need to find a support group. So even in Phoenix, I found there was no such thing as a caregiver's support group. I found a cancer support group, and I joined that. And there were actually a couple, I was one, and there were a couple of other caregivers that had joined the group. Made a big, big difference.
Okay.
To be able to talk to people who had cancer and people who were taking care of them, so that I didn't feel so alone.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Diane. We appreciate everything you've shared with us today. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for being my friend.
You're welcome. Oh, and one thing I did want to tell you I've noticed.
What?
Is that your eyes, when you're smiling, your eyes are so happy. They look like my little dog Zoe's eyes.
Aww. Now there's a compliment.
When Bob is rubbing her tummy, her eyes get that kind of moon shape, like it's joy and peace.
Wow.
And yeah, you remind me.
I am glad to hear that, and Bob hasn't even been rubbing my tummy. I mean, this is amazing. Thank you, Diane. That was a compliment. I thank you very much. I wanted you to hear her story, and it's pretty impressive too, isn't it?